Yeah. You know, basically, we can just sort of run through. I got one more slide, and then we'll turn it over to Dean on sort of entity formation, business formation, and financing. But you know, when you're a startup, I think, you know, startup folks will come sort of in sort of two categories when they go up and they're negotiating a contract with a large company. Sometimes I see these startup folks who think, you know, I'm going to win every single battle I have with my development partner. I don't care if it's, you know, I don't care if it's Oracle across the table from me. I don't care if it's, you know, I don't care if it's Cisco who's come to me and wants to, you know, fight over everything. I'm going to fight over everything. I'll tell you what, you know, the Ciscos of the world, the Oracles of the world, they'll take one look at you, think you're more trouble than you're worth, and sort of walk away. So I think one of the things to always keep in mind when you're a startup, and then I see the opposite too. I see, hey, whatever terms they want, more power to them. You know, I'll accept it. I'll take it. You know, I'm small guy, they're big guy, and we'll go from there. That's not an acceptable answer either. And I think folks leave money on the table. They leave opportunities on the table. They foreclose things in the future. So, you know, our advice to clients is anytime you're negotiating agreements, protect whether they relate to your IP, whether they relate to distribution of your product, you know, pick your battles. Know what your big key items are. Usually that comes down to protecting your IP, protecting the liability, giving a good risk allocation to yourself, making sure that you have the ability to fight another day. These are all things that are important to keep in mind. So, you know, we always encourage that. And, you know, always keep in mind, too, the value of your business is based on the commercial success of the business. You know, lawyers can always point out risks. I mean, that's what we're hired to do. You know, at the end of the day, the least risky thing to do is to do nothing, right? And so if you do nothing, your business isn't going to grow, though. And so always be practical. Always realize that when you're talking to lawyers, when you're talking to advisors about entering a deal is always about risk allocation, always about finding the right balance that works for your company. So always keep that in mind. And the final point, which sort of leads into what we're going to talk about next, is, you know, if you don't protect your IP, when that time comes for a financing transaction or an acquisition, you're going to have to sit down and really ask yourself, did you protect your IP? What is it that you have to sell? And so, you know, the reason we started with this, I think sometimes folks will start with, you know, the entity formation. But the reason we start with this is, you know, at the outset, you want to make sure that you have something to sell when you get to the next phase of your business. So,
I thought we started like this because I lost a coin flip.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Let's just for a few seconds. Let's focus on some specifics.
Sure.
So, how many people have been in negotiations with a company for a piece of software that you wrote where the company wanted exclusive rights or an exclusive to a market? Anyone? Couple. That's something that always comes up with me, is that everybody, you know, the big company always wants the exclusive and they want to lock you out.
And what does exclusive mean? It means that you're locked out, right? It means that the moment you grant that exclusive right, for whatever the duration of that exclusive grant is, even you're locked out from utilizing that IP. So, you know,
and the reason I point that out is just it's one specific example of the way a big company might come up and, you know, try to negotiate for a stronger position. What are other examples of the types of things that a big company might do?
Other examples that a big company might do: ownership, right? Transferring ownership of the IP to them. Giving you a situation where they're not willing to sign up to non-compete obligations, and maybe they have some provisions in their agreement that say, you know, anything we learn from exposure to your IP, we have the ability to go out and reuse and redevelop. That's a lovely provision, you know. So there's a whole host of things that they can do.
For a first right of refusal.
Yeah. On the equity side?
I've come across that many times in strategic financings when a company says, all right, we'll put $1 million in or $2 million into this company for 20% interest. Sounds great. And then you see the terms that come across with the definitive document, and there's a first right of refusal in there that if you go to sell to anyone else, well, that's can be, if it's not narrow, we don't like it at all, but if you have to take it, it has to be extremely narrow. Otherwise, someone else like Sanjay comes along and wants to buy your company, and he starts looking, doing due diligence, and he sees that right of first refusal. He says, I'm not going to bother. Why should I go through all the time and effort of 2 months of negotiating with you for this strategic to come along and say, thank you for cutting the deal for us and whittling this guy down and getting a good deal. We're going to take it. So it can also be a kiss of death from any other buyer.
Yeah.
So that's our example.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, next slide.
So just sort of turning the next, we'll let Dean pick up on sort of business formation and funding strategies for companies.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Next slide. How to begin. I was going to pull a Rick Perry and just have 3 things and not remember the third one, but but I had 4 and I just didn't.
Oops.
EPA.
So how do you begin? I mean, for some of you guys who are thinking about starting your own business, first of all, you have to have an idea, and generally that idea is something that solves a need in the marketplace. There's a pain in the marketplace, and your solution solves that pain. The next thing you have to think about is the market. Is there a market for this? I may have a great idea for a flying washing machine, but I don't think there's really going to be much of a market out there for flying washing machines. So therefore, you might be able to patent it. It may be a great idea, but if it isn't, if there's no market for it, there's no adoption. So this happened actually a lot in the 96, 97 through 2000 timeframe. I worked a lot in the telecom space, and I started representing a lot of the wireless companies, the very, very first wireless companies that came out. And the problem was that virtually to a company, they all failed. They didn't fail because they didn't have great technology. They failed because of the adoption curve wasn't there. Okay, the market, most people still had just regular dial phones, didn't have smartphones, didn't have the iPhone 4, didn't have the Droids, and didn't have the phones that surf the internet and GPS and everything else. So now wireless companies are flourishing, but the ones that came out in '99 and 2000 were leading edge companies. The problem was and VCs fell in love with them, and one of my clients received $18 million of financing, could never get much traction going, and it's because the adoption, the end user products weren't there for people to deploy their solution. You need a team. You need, if anyone hasn't read Richard Collins' book, Good to Great, read it. You got to get the right people on the bus, and sometimes that's sweat equity guys around you or gals. But you got to get a good team around you. Most VCs and angels aren't interested in investing in one man or one woman bands. So you want to get a team around you, and then there's the money aspect. Okay, next slide. So choice of entity. These are the basic choices that you have. There's the C corporation. Most VCs and angels like it to be a Delaware corporation. It's a well-established body of law for both the company and for shareholders. So well articulated, well argued. So it saves a lot of court battles because the answers are already kind of laid out. LLC, limited liability corporation. Which is more and more popular for starting out, gives a lot of great flexibility, allows for the pass-through of both losses and income to the shareholders. A lot of companies start out with an LLC, and then maybe if they take investment down the road, they just convert into a C corporation when they go to take the institutional money. S corporation is not used. If you're going to be a plumbing company, go ahead and be an S. If you're a technology company, very, very, very few, because of the limitations on a number of shareholders and the inability to move IP around. S corporations tend to be disfavored among technology companies. Partnerships. is another aspect as well. Next. So which is right for you? You have to kind of look at the question of, are you looking for growth or income? Another way to say income is this a lifestyle company? Is this a company you want to have? You want to make money? You want to run the local, dry cleaning store? Then you're not looking for venture capital. You might as well be an LLC, an S corporation, or a partnership. You may as well be a pass-through entity. So, are you driving to a venture capital financing to be followed by an exit, either an IPO, because a partnership can't go public? Nor can an LLC, and nor can an S corporation. So you have to be a C corporation to go public. So if you have no plans to distribute profits and you're in a high growth mode, you're going to take the company's profits and plow it into the company and continue growing organically, as well as through venture capital money coming in, then you probably want to be a C corporation. Would you prefer to bootstrap the company and maximize tax efficiencies and just have a business that you're going to run, pass on to your children and grandchildren? Then you're probably better off with the LLC or the S corporation or a partnership aspect.
And by bootstrap, you mean putting your own money in to
right.
Build it yourself from the ground up.
Yes,
All
exactly.
Right.
Next. So let's touch quickly on unlimited liability. First of all, everyone needs to know that you generally go through life every day subject to unlimited liability for your own actions. If you drive your car and you hit a bunch of school children, you're in trouble. And you have unlimited liability.
Dean has a problem with school children today.
Apparently. But you generally, for your own actions, you have unlimited liability. I mean, you may have insurance that cover you for auto accidents, and it may get expensive if you hit too many school children, but once you have a
yes, it would.
Once you have a business with partners or employees, you become subject to liability for their actions, particularly if it's in the concept of the joint idea, the joint cause. So, for example, I often have like 2 or 3 folks come into the office and they sit down and they say, well, we have this business and we'd like to consider incorporating. And I'm like, well, how long have you been doing this business? Oh, we've been working for like 6 months on this together. And I'm like, well, what have you been talking to people about for the last 6 months? And have you cut any deals? Oh yeah, we've been cutting with vendors and talking to these customers. And if you're doing that, so if Yermo, Sanjay and I have been for 6 months playing around with some software, and we've been selling it and have some beta tests and have some people using it out there. If Yermo goes out there and on our team and commits the team to some kind of financing or from a loan from a bank or commits to some kind of agreement or puts the software in somewhere where the GPS tells someone to drive into a mall and kill all those children, we could be liable for that because, again, we are acting, the law may deem us, I mean, we're at risk at least, that we are deemed to be a general partners with each other, and we are then held accountable for each other's acts. So, when you start, if you're by yourself, you have your own liability, and you may want to incorporate or set up an LLC anyway to get that limited liability protection. If you're collaborating, like you two guys right there are talking about collaborating with each other, you're acting as general partners until you incorporate, and get the limited liability or set up an LLC.
Which means that acting as an individual, your own personal assets are at risk for any action against you. That's the bottom line.
Our assets are at risk for what you do
right.
in a partnership.